week 7 of the fantasy football season. He has the top 36 running backs I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. It seems like weekly he's getting over 100 yards. He's getting 1 or 2 touchdowns minimum. It's Derrick Henry weekly. And it's just been a great fit for him with Baltimore this season, where he's definitely rejuvenated a little bit. I know he's had some great years the past couple seasons, but the pace he's on, age is not catching up to Derrick Henry. And once again this week, a good matchup at Tampa Bay, where their defense has been pretty down over the last couple weeks. Been a potential shootout at Tampa Bay. I think Henry goes off once again. Number 2, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. So this week, a ball game at the New York Giants. You know he's going to get rained down with boos, especially going to a division rival. But the Giants, they just didn't want to give him the long-term contract, and he played that one season on the franchise tag and left in free agency and went to Philadelphia. So this Giant defense isn't all that great this season, especially Kayvon Thibodeau. He's out for a few more weeks on IR, and I think Saquon Barkley has a monster performance versus former team number 3, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. Kenneth Walker, he's been getting it going over the last couple weeks since he came off a 2-week injury with an oblique injury. So this week, a good matchup indoors at Atlanta. We know their run defense really isn't all that good. We've seen it over the last couple weeks. Last week, Hubbard went over 90 yards in that ball game. And on the fast turf and in the high-powered offense of the Seattle Seahawks, Kenneth Walker, the last few weeks, like I said, he's been a top running back, especially when he returned versus the Lions. In week 4, we had 3 touchdowns. And then the last couple weeks, he's been steady, 15-plus fantasy points in PPR leagues. Number 4, Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams, and now with Cooper Kupp most likely returning, I believe, to the lineup this week. It just opens up the offense a little bit more. The box isn't going to be that loaded against Kyren Williams in this one. And we know this Vegas Raider team, they just can't stop anyone. We even saw Najee Harris go over 100 yards for his first 100-yard game on the ground this season. So Kyren Williams, it wouldn't be surprising to me if he has one of his best games of the season this week. And we've seen already a few games for him, over 25 fantasy points in PPR leagues. Number 5, Breece Hall of the New York Jets this week. I know tougher matchup on paper at the Pittsburgh Steelers, but this Jet offense is loaded now, adding Devontae Adams in a deal yesterday. Now you got Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Breece Hall in the backfield, Tyler Conklin. So this offense has a lot of weapons, and Breece Hall is still one of the better receiving backs out of the backfield. So last week it was a great sign. Hall over 130 yards from scrimmage. I know a couple big plays he just missed finding the end zone was Hall, getting stopped at the goal line. But this week at Pittsburgh, I still believe the Jets are going to want to hammer the run, even with Devontae Adams over there now is a New York Jet. And Breece Hall, like I said, one of the best receiving backs out of the backfield, and this offense is getting it going. Number 6, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. Last week, a monster performance at the Panthers, 95 yards on the ground, 120 yards from scrimmage, 2 total touchdowns. And this week, a good matchup versus the Seahawks, where they just can't stop anyone of late. We saw a couple weeks ago Tyrone Tracy go for 130 yards versus Seattle Seahawks team. And then Jordan Mason and Guerrero, they rushed over 150 yards combined in that ball game as well. So their run defense isn't good. Bijan Robinson last week was an encouraging sign. And this week, once again, I think he has a solid performance. Number 7, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. After a 2-game absence, and the run game was horrible for the most part last week for this Indianapolis Colts team, I think Jonathan Taylor suits up. Miami Dolphins coming to town. Anthony Richardson returning to the lineup as well for this Indianapolis Colts team. And this Dolphin defense, we know they've had struggles versus the run, especially the last couple weeks. We saw it in week 4. Tony Pollard had a big game on the ground. Week 5, Ramondre Stevenson. And now JT, I think, returns in this one and has a great performance. Number 8, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. Kamara, I know the numbers are going to take a little bit of a hit with Spencer Rattler in the lineup. Chris Olave most likely out in this ball game. And Rashid Shaheed hasn't practiced as well, so I'm ruling him out in my mind. So this week versus Denver, there's going to be a lot of targets going Kamara's way. A lot of unknown wide receivers, and they're going to go with heavy tight end sets, I believe, is New Orleans, where we're going to see Juwan Johnson. We're going to see a lot of Foster Monroe. And if Taysom Hill suits up in this one, we'll see a lot of him. But like I said, Kamara's going to get peppered with targets. He's going to run the football a whole lot, and he's just going to work his way into volume. Number 9, Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans. Mixon, he was out for a few weeks with a high ankle sprain, returned with a vengeance last week, and he looked quick, Joe Mixon, over 100 yards on the ground. He had a receiving touchdown as well. And Joe Mixon in this offense, he fits like a glove, and it was a great offseason deal they made for him. And this week, I know it's a tougher matchup at the Green Bay Packers, but Joe Mixon, talent-wise, still one of the better backs in the league. Number 10, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers, 4 games in a row over 90 yards on the ground for Chuba Hubbard. And he's been great for this Carolina Panther team. I know the window's opened up for Jonathan Brooks to practice for Carolina, but I think it's going to be a few more weeks, and there's no rush to bring Brooks in off the injured list for this Carolina Panther team, where they're going nowhere, obviously, this season, 1-5. And this week, it's a decent matchup at the Commanders. Even though I know Commanders are 4-2 on the year, they still give up a lot of rushing yards to backs on the season. Number 11, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. He's the only player on Tennessee that I have confidence in to put in my starting lineup week in and week out. So definitely a better start for him this season than it was last year. I know Pollard had 1,000 yards. Mediocre to poor ball games it was for him with the Cowboys. But this season, he's fit well with this Tennessee Titan team. Tajay Spears, he's banged up week to week with his hamstring injury. And Tony Pollard, he took this backfield over quickly in the season. So even if Spears was to play, even though he's not really a threat to Pollard's workload. Number 12, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. Brian Robinson, he's been one of the best backs in the league. I know he missed last week's game with the knee injury, but I believe he returns in this one. And this week, a great matchup versus the Carolina Panthers. Give up the most fantasy points to running backs on the season. So Brian Robinson, he's having a top 12 season at the running back position. It seems like he finds the end zone once per game. His receiving out of the backfield has improved as well this season. So if he suits up in this one, is Brian Robinson. He's a top 12 option. 13, Jordan Mason of the San Francisco 49ers. So it was called his injury wasn't serious with the shoulder, leaving that ball game versus the Seahawks in week 6. And they said if they needed him in case of emergency, he could have played as Mason. And they just sat him out precautionary. So this week, tough matchup, no doubt about it. Kansas City Chiefs, one of the better defenses in the league. But Mason, he's one of the better running backs in the league in terms of yards per carry and 100-yard games this season on the ground. Number 14, Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. That didn't look like the hip injury is too serious, coming off the bye week. And this week, a good matchup versus the Detroit Lion team he's very familiar with throughout his career, playing all those seasons with the Green Bay Packers. And now with Hutchinson out of the lineup, that's a big defender route for this Detroit Lion team. So Aaron Jones, if he's healthy and ready to go, he's a running back that we've seen weekly put up good numbers, and he's fit well in this offense with Minnesota so far this season. 15 staying in the same game, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. So I think this has a potential shootout written all over it. I know Minnesota's defense has been great this season, but this Lion offense, they're taking things to the next level. And we saw last week what they could do. Went into Dallas. I know defense was banged up. And to be honest, they're an overrated defense, even with Parsons in there, or the Dallas Cowboys. But David Montgomery, he's been a solid running back all season. Him and Jahmyr Gibbs, the best 1-2 combo backfield, I believe, in the NFL. And this week, even a tough matchup in Minnesota, Montgomery most likely is going to get a goal line touchdown. He could catch a couple passes out of the backfield, and a physical back in between the tackles. 16, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. McDermott saying there hopefully he's going to play in this one. This week, not the greatest of matchups. Tennessee, they're a pretty stout run defense this season. And last week, we saw Ray Davis explode with a big game, over 150 yards from scrimmage for the Buffalo Bills. Cook, one of the best backs in the league. Ray Davis is a fill-in. He was great, no doubt about it, but he's not going to take any carries, I believe, from James Cook. And if he plays in this one, he's a nice number 2 running back for owners. 17, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. Josh Jacobs, the volume's been there. Emmanuel Wilson really hasn't been a threat to the workload for Josh Jacobs on the season. And Jacobs, I know he's not a good receiver out of the backfield. I know this is a pass-first offense as well for this Green Bay Packer team, led by Jordan Love, just spreading that football out and making plays. But this week, a pretty good matchup versus the Houston Texans, where their defense hasn't been all that great this season. So I think Jacobs on volume, and I know you got to hope he gets a goal line touchdown in this one to have a big game. I still believe he's been a solid option and consistent for the most part. 18, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. Yes, I'm a little down on Jahmyr Gibbs over the last couple weeks. I know he's had double-digit fantasy points in every game this season in PPR leagues, but obviously he's not getting a lot of goal line touches this season behind David Montgomery. And also, even in the receiving game, we've seen some games where he's been pedestrian as well. So this week with a tougher matchup, and like I said, the goal line's been taken out most weeks for Jahmyr Gibbs by David Montgomery. I'm a little bit down on him, but still a number 2 option, solid for owners. 19, J.K. Dobbins of the Los Angeles Chargers. J.K. Dobbins, it's his backfield now, even though Kamini Vidal, as the weeks go on, I think is going to eat into the workload a little bit more. We saw Vidal have a 38-yard touchdown on a wheel route down the sidelines last week. He's a great talent. That's why they took him in day 2 of the NFL draft was this Los Angeles Chargers team. And we know Gus Edwards, he's out. He's on IR. But this is a great matchup for Dobbins at Arizona. 3 games this season with 90-plus yards on the ground. And I think, once again, Dobbins has a good game on Monday night. Number 20, James Conner, staying in the same game of the Arizona Cardinals. So last week, a lot of factors against Conner. Bad weather out there in Lambeau Field. They were down early. And once he fumbled that football in the third quarter, we just didn't really see Conner the rest of the ballgame with Trey Benson, Mercado playing the running back position. But this week, it's a beatable matchup versus the Los Angeles Chargers, I believe, for James Conner. He's a solid back that can catch the football out of the backfield as well. And let's say Marvin Harrison's out and try to run the football even more in this one. But I think it's going to be a grinded-out type ball game between these two teams anyway. 21, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. Achane coming into the year, I thought he was the top 10 back. In the first 2 games of the season with Tua in the lineup, he went out there and had monster performances, over 20 fantasy points in both games in PPR leagues. But the last few weeks, since we've seen Thompson and now Huntley the last 2 weeks playing quarterback for this Miami Dolphin team, the numbers have gone down. Then he was concussed 2 weeks ago in that game at the New England Patriots. But this week, it's a beatable matchup at the Indianapolis Colts. They got torched on the ground all season long. Joe Mixon early in the year, Josh Jacobs last week, Tony Pollard, and Achane, if he's healthy, and if this offense can move the football effectively, I think he could be decent and outplay this number 21, number 22, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. Kareem Hunt, we know he's a veteran running back. We know he knows how to get the job done, and that's why he's still in the league. And 2 weeks ago in that ball game, looked pretty good versus the New Orleans Saints, who are a pretty decent defense. I know they got blown out last week, 51-27, but that was more of the offense putting them in bad position. Anyway, Kareem Hunt catch the football out of the backfield. He knows the Andy Reid playbook, and he already took the job from Carson Steele quickly after he only signed about 3 weeks ago with this Chief team. So even in a tough matchup, the volume is going to be there, and there's not really a threat right now to his playing time. 23, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. Last week, Zach Moss fumbled the football in the third quarter, and he didn't get 1 touch after that, and Chase Brown put the game on ice in the fourth quarter, scoring a late touchdown. I know his yards per carry weren't great in that one, but Chase Brown, he's a dynamic running back. Catch the football out of the backfield. He's got that game-breaking speed. And this week in a matchup at the Cleveland Browns, where I know their defense on paper is good, but obviously 1-5 on the season, and each and every week they're just giving up tons of points. I think Chase Brown has a nice ball game. 24, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. Stevenson missed last week's game, but he was hopeful he wasn't going to miss much time, and I believe he's going to return in this one at the Jacksonville Jaguars. And if he don't, Antonio Gibson is going to be in the lineup, but he's not really going to have much of a ceiling, I believe, is Gibson. So Ramondre Stevenson in decent matchups this season. We've seen him go out there and have good ball games for this New England Patriot team, and this is a good matchup on paper at the Jaguars. We saw last week DeAndre Swift in a muck in that one versus the Jacksonville Jaguars in London, and Stevenson, if he's in this ball game, I think it's possible 80 total yards and a touchdown for him is definitely a ceiling that is reachable. 25, Tank Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So it looks like Travis Etienne is going to be out with a hamstring shoulder injury. He's week to week. So anytime a coach says week to week, just doesn't sound good, obviously, that player is going to play in the current weeks. At Tank Bigsby, we've seen some pop games from him going back a couple weeks ago. 103 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns versus the Indianapolis Colts. And this week, it's a beatable matchup versus the Patriots. We saw Joe Mixon come off the high ankle sprain last week, rush over 100 yards, and have a big performance, over 20 PPR fantasy points. I think Tank Bigsby, if he's going to be the man in the backfield with the Ernest Johnson, getting some playing time as well. I think Bigsby could be a nice low-end 2 flex option for owners this week. 26, Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants. I think this Giant team, they should stick with the youth movement. Obviously, Malik Neighbors they have, even though he's missed the last 2 games. Second-year receiver Wan'Dale Robinson has looked pretty solid. And now Tracy, the last 2 weeks, filling in for Singletary, 2 games in a row for 15 fantasy points in PPR leagues for Tyrone Tracy. So he's a former wide receiver, now transitioned to running back in the NFL. And he's looked good, and he even had 6 catches for 57 yards out of the backfield as well last week. So this week, in a matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles, where they're going to most likely be trailing early and often, this New York Giant team, I think Tracy's going to get in there and get opportunity. And even if Singletary returns, this backfield, I believe, should belong to Tracy. 27, Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers, a tough matchup this week with the New York Jets coming to town. And this Jet team, I know their defense didn't look great last week. Ray Davis gashed them on the ground and in the air, where Ray Davis went for over 150 total yards in that one. Najee Harris last week, the best game of the season for him, 105 yards on the ground, found the end zone. And Jaren Warren, he just really hasn't been a factor with injury this season and not looking 100% in the games he's played. So Harris, even in a tough matchup, I believe he's a decent flex option. 28, Bucky Irvin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bucky Irvin and Sean Tucker, great 1-2 combo last week in that game. I think Rachaad White, they're going to take their time with him, is his Tampa Bay Buc team with the foot injury. But this week it's a tougher matchup versus the Baltimore Ravens, where they've been pretty decent versus the run this year. And like I said, I think this is going to be a 50-50 split between Irvin and Sean Tucker, with Tucker being the better receiving back out of the backfield. And Bucky Irvin in between the tackles has been solid so far his rookie season. But this week I'm just not that high on Bucky Irvin, like I said, because we don't know for sure what the backfield situation is going to be. And if they're trailing early and often as well in this game, Bucky Irvin's not much of a receiving back out of the backfield this season in this Tampa Bay system. 29, Austin Eckler of the Washington Commanders. Austin Eckler, every game this season he's played in, he's had double-digit fantasy points. And even if Brian Robinson returns, Eckler is going to catch the football out of the backfield. One of the best receiving backs in the league is Austin Eckler. And this week it's a perfect matchup versus the Carolina Panthers coming to town. Give up the most fantasy points to backs on the season. So Eckler, like I said, is a flex option. He's been perfect, 10 or more fantasy points in all the games he's played this season for PPR managers. Number 30, Zach Moss of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Moss, he possibly could be in the doghouse now for the Cincinnati Bengal team. Like I mentioned early in the video, he got benched after he fumbled in the third quarter. Chase Brown took over, and he put the game on ice, finding the end zone. So this week, it's not a great matchup at the Cleveland Browns with Zach Moss. I still believe he's a solid running back. I know it was one bad fumble. Coaching staff, they didn't want to deal with it, so they benched him and punished him in that ball game. But I believe he's going to still get work in this one. And they're not just going to sit him out for, a few games because of one fumble. He learned his lesson sitting out that second half of the ball game pretty much. Chase Brown looked good, but I think Moss will still get 8-12 touches in this one. Number 31, Nick Chubb of the Cleveland Browns. Jerome Ford most likely going to be out, in my opinion, week to week with a hamstring injury. He got ruled out pretty quickly in last week's loss in that one at the Philadelphia Eagles. And Nick Chubb most likely returning off injured reserve. So Chubb coming off the ACL-MCL injury last week. Devastating the injury, no doubt about it. We know Nick Chubb, he was the top 5, top 10 back, wherever you want to put him in fantasy football the last few seasons. And this week, even returning to the lineup, Deonta Foreman, Pierre Strong, I believe, are going to mix in with Nick Chubb in the backfield. And they're going to ramp up his activity as the weeks go on. But like I said, this team's 1-5 on the season, and I don't believe they're going to be playing for much. So Nick Chubb, he's going to have a low ceiling this week. 32, Sean Tucker of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Exploded for 190 total yards from scrimmage last week with Sean Tucker and found the end zone twice. A good receiver out of the backfield. A lot of hype coming out of college. Obviously, with off the field and injuries, he fell in the NFL draft in 2023. But last week, he showed his potential with Sean Tucker. And him and Baker Mayfield in the passing game had a good rapport, and he's physical as well in between the tackles. So Rachaad White definitely lost a lot of touches if he returns in this game, because after a game like that for Sean Tucker versus a pretty good defense, he's not a running back you could deny in your running back room if you're this Tampa Bay Buc team. The harder pickups off the wire this week. So this week, I'm still going to lower expectations, but I believe as a flex option, he could be useful. 33, Javonte Williams. Denver Broncos, this backfield's been a problem all season long. No one's really producing between him and Jaleel McLaughlin. And this week, it's a tougher matchup at the New Orleans Saints. The only plus is, obviously, it's Thursday Night Football. The game's usually high scoring in that one. And this Saint defense is banged up. And we saw last week they gave up 51 points in that game with New Orleans. And Bucky Irvin and Sean Tucker, in that one, they ran over 150 yards combined in that ball game. So that's the only silver lining in this one for Javonte Williams. But teams, their game plan's been to stop the run and obviously try to let Bo Nix beat him in this game. So Javonte Williams, he's been a solid back, but just the ceiling hasn't really been there. 34, Alexander Mattison of the Vegas Raiders. Alexander Mattison, he's the main back over there for this Las Vegas Raider team. We know Zamir White, he's been banged up, and even if he returns, Zamir White, he wasn't even averaging 2.5 yards per carry. So this week, it's not the greatest of matchups at the Los Angeles Rams, where they're coming off a bye week, and their defense has been getting healthier over the last couple weeks as well. But Madison, he at least could catch the football out of the backfield. And with the young second-year quarterback Aiden O'Connell on the center, there's going to be dump-offs, and there's more targets opening now with the Devontae Adams chapter finally closed, and he got traded away to the New York Jets. I think Madison in the passing game, especially if they're trailing early and often, could get some bogus points that way in PPR leagues. 35, Tyler Algier of the Atlanta Falcons. I've said this a lot this week in my videos. Algier, if he was on another team, he could be a starting running back for, most likely be a starting running back for 15, 20 teams in the NFL is Tyler Algier. That's just how talented it is. We saw him in his rookie year before Bijan got drafted the next season, that he was a good 1,000-yard running back for this Atlanta Falcon team. And last week he had a monster game. I know some of it was garbage time, but he went for 18 carries, 105 on the ground, and found the end zone. So this week versus Seattle, I think he's going to get some touches. 8 to 12 touch range is Tyler Algier. But as long as Bijan Robinson's there, he's not really going to be an option you count on week in and week out. And 36 and final back, I'm rankings Antonio Gibson of the New England Patriots. So he's a solid receiving back out of the backfield. Obviously a former wideout in college, and that was the role for him over the last couple seasons, the receiving and third down back with the Washington Commanders. So this week, a good matchup with the Jaguars where their defense can't stop anyone. Saw it last week. We saw a big game from DeAndre Swift. We saw it in week 5 where Trey Sermon had a nice game and Tyler Goodson as well. So Jaguars, they give up a decent amount of fantasy points to backs on the season. And Gibson, like I said, is a change of pace back. He could be good, but there's possibility he could be starting as well. So if, say, Stevenson's out, once again, Antonio Gibson, he's a running back that will move into that 25 to 30 range for me if Stevenson's out. But this week, if Stevenson plays, he's a back-end option. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for Week 7 of the fantasy football season.